Hey everyone. This video contains a lot of stories that you may find unsettling. If you have a weak stomach, I suggest you clicking off this video and watching something else. I would also like to show some respect to all of the people who work these types of jobs. I can't imagine what they go through, and they truly deserve respect for what they do. All of that being said, let's begin. Number 1. Not a paramedic, but law enforcement. I hear a panicky call over the radio for a supervisor to attend a unit. This was around 1 a.m. well into the night shift. I was covering the unit next door, so I popped over to see the officer. She's white as a ghost and sitting at a table. I ask her what's up and she just points to a cell phone. I look over and the window is covered in blood. So I look in, and it's like a B-movie horror scene. The guy had cut a major vein on the inside of his wrist parallel to the pinky, and then slit the skin open so he could pull it out even more. Every pump of his heart squirted blood like I've never seen in real life. Like I said, B-movie style. There was blood on the walls, the windows, the blankets, and the toilet and sink. And the floor. My God, the floor. When the paramedics finally arrived, he got under his own power and walked to the gurney. We had to take pictures and collect evidence from the scene after he was gone. I still think about it sometimes. The door was glued to the jamb with blood, the smell of iron and the sheer amount of what was on the floor, and there it goes playing through my head all over again. Number 2. I'm an EMT, not a medic. This one messed me up for a bit and makes me a much more cautious driver. Some teenagers with Mustangs decided to race each other down the highway at 1 a.m. They end up losing control at insane speeds and initially bumping each other, sending the car in the right lane off into the trees. The driver somehow survived and was medevaced out in critical condition. The car in the left lane went over the guardrail median and head first into a Jeep, then caught on fire. We got on the scene and found the now extinguished, burnt mess of the wreck. The passengers of the Mustang were just carbon stacks. No bodily or facial recognition whatsoever, just charred masses of what used to be people. The driver of the Jeep was severed in half, torso hanging out of the driver's side window, legs still by the pedals, and organs everywhere in the seat. The worst part was the driver of the Jeep was just minding his own business, driving along to wherever he was going. All because some kids decided to be idiots. His life was over in a split second. Number 3. This happened while I wasn't at work responding to a wreck, but a car went off the road right outside my house. They hit a concrete drainage cylinder in the ditch. 2 passengers were ejected through the windshield. 16 and 18-year-old girls really badly cut up. The 18-year-old's face was hanging off pretty much while she was laying on the hood. Then she screamed about her baby. I found an 18-month-old baby wedged underneath the passenger seat in really bad shape, unresponsive. It was a pretty hard scene, but as far as I was told, the baby survived but with lifelong injuries. The girl survived but barely. The driver was drunk. I say this all the time, but I'm gonna say it again. Don't drink and drive. Number 4. I'm a former EMT less than 1 year as an on-call. 3 years as beach/EMT lifeguard. This is the call that made me quit. My unit gets called to a multi-car collision on the interstate. We arrive to a sedan on its side in the right lane and an SUV in the median over the top of the cable stop. 2 men and 1 female adults are walking around with minor scrapes. The woman is hysterical though. Fire rescue was working on the SUV. When it rolled over, it had landed on the post, perfectly squishing the child in the center car seat. The 5-year-old sister was pinned by the neck and waist to the seat, and the 7-year-old brother was decapitated, with his head sitting on the roof, basically looking at his younger sister. I removed the head and talked to the little girl, who was the age of my daughter at the time, telling her she would be okay. Fire rescue cut the cables to release her from the seats, and because there was tension on the cables, they moved and basically sliced her in half. She didn't even make it 20 feet to the ambulance. She literally died in my arms. I absolutely hated that job. Number 5. My best friend is a paramedic. She took a call for a child who had fallen into a pool. There were actually 2 kids who had wandered out of their home, and they found the little girl floating in the shallow end of the neighbor's pool. No sight of the little boy. The dad had gotten the little girl out of the pool and was desperately trying CPR when the paramedics arrived. Still hadn't found the little boy. The paramedics took over CPR and then not long later found the little boy in the deep end of the pool. My friend said that the dad was wailing and horrified that his little boy had been there the whole time and he hadn't helped him or even thought to look in the deep end. Both of the children died. Number 6. A paramedic friend of mine told me a story about a couple who were both handicapped and in electric wheelchairs. Neither could walk at all, and they could barely move their arms. One night, the guy was sitting in a woolen sweater, and he was smoking. Before finishing his cigarette, he got tired, and he had his head tilted down and ignited the sweater. When the medics arrived, he was dead and completely burnt to a crisp. The lady told the medics that she had helplessly rolled back and forth between the sink and him, getting a cup of water at a time and tossing it on him, trying to put the fire out. Number 7. My brother is a paramedic, and in the city he works requires an officer to go with them when they arrive on the scene due to some of the violence. They were called by the police to come help a naked, distressed male covered in blood and was wandering the street yelling at cars and carrying a knife. When they arrived, they were met with the officer who said that the guy was dragging 2 naked children down the road before he tried to throw them into the traffic, and the man ran down the road to yell at cars. The officer called for more backup to confront the man, and my brother called the fire chief to get more people to help handle the kids and to stand by if any of the officers got injured by the man. In about 10 minutes, there were 5 officers, my brother, his partner, the fire chief, and 2 more paramedics. So 10 men in total. The police coaxed the man to get near the ambulance so that they can assess if he was injured or required immediate attention. The man was put on a gurney and was taken to my brother's ambulance to be assessed. In the ambulance, my brother, the initial officer, and my brother's partner all sat in the back to check out the man. In the instant my brother closed the door, the man decided to be belligerent. He punched my brother in the nose and lunged for the officer's gun. The partner and my brother hit their panic buttons on their radios that go off an alert to any of the units in the area to respond. The officer gets a handcuff around the guy's hand but can't attach it to anything because the guy has superhuman strength due to being methed out of his mind. The back doors to the ambulance then opens and there's the other 4 officers, the fire chief, and the other 2 paramedics, and all 7 guys dive on the meth guy and attempt to restrain him. The fire chief got hit with the wild handcuff in the teeth, and all 10 of them could barely keep the guy down. My brother said that 2 officers decided to tase the man, and they finally got him restrained to the gurney. He was given a sedative, and 2 officers had to ride in the back of the ambulance with their tasers out to make sure he didn't try anything again. Once they dropped the man off at the hospital, all the officers, paramedics, and anyone who was in contact with the man was quarantined in a ward for several hours. Apparently, the guy was in contact with caustic and dangerous chemicals from making meth in his apartment, and anyone in contact with him could be carrying the same chemicals around in their clothes. So, you remember how he was naked when they found him? Him, his kids, and his wife were all naked because he was making meth in his apartment. His wife complained that she didn't want him making meth anymore, so he beat the crap out of her, thus getting covered in her blood. He was so angry that he decided he was going to kill his own kids and drag them outside when he was then confronted by the officer. Now, I'm not that familiar with the laws around creating meth or hard drugs, but apparently when charged with creating methamphetamine, you get charges against you for every living person in that building that is put in danger. He lived in an apartment building with over 100 people in it, so 100 people were in danger of him making meth, so he was arrested for putting all of them in danger. He was then charged with assault of officers, aggravated assault, resisting arrest, 3 counts of attempted murder, and cooking meth with a huge sentence. He definitely went away for a very long time. Number 7. There was this one time I had been talking to a patient who we had been called to take into a 5150 hold for a 24-hour psych evaluation by the local police department. He was a big guy and was holding a small Hello Kitty flip phone and crying about his daughter. When I got to explaining what we would be doing, he pulled out a pistol and then shot himself in the head. I got a mouthful of brain and skull that ricocheted from the cargo container he was leaning against. Yeah, local PD. He's very clear of weapons. Good job. Number 8. This didn't happen to me, but to an instructor when I was taking EMT training. A convertible had flipped and skidded down the road. Both the woman who was driving and the child in the car seat had half of their heads grounded away by the sliding car. There were 2 very clear and distinct streaks of blood and brain down the road. That was the day that she decided to be an instructor instead of an on-call paramedic, and I can't say anyone blames her. Number 9. This next set of stories are all from the same person. My father was the only licensed paramedic in our Tri-County area for many years. His area covered 2 interstates and numerous major highways in Ohio. He is undoubtedly the toughest person I've ever known, just based on the stories I've heard him recounting when he didn't know I could hear him, coupled with some things that I know have happened to him and secondhand stories from other first responders who have worked with him. His own personal accident happened back in 1988. He was on his Honda Goldwing. A drunk driver in the opposite lane went to pass their car, hitting him head-on at about 65 miles per hour. Him being a bodybuilder, he involuntarily tensed enough to survive the accident, and when the first responders showed up, he was trying and failing to stand his bike up to ride off, and they had to gently inform him that he's not going to be able to do that because his left leg below the knee was still in the drunk driver's grill, about 20 feet away. He did get the leg reattached, titanium rods replacing the tibia, and about 1.25 inches shorter and a slight limp, but he's still going strong. Number 10. On to his paramedic stories. He's been the first man on scene for numerous accidents, with high school age kids, one of which happened about 8 miles from our home, which is very important. 2 teenage girls lost control and hit a power line, which collapsed on them, pinning them in the car. Apparently there were serious injuries. They were conscious and coherent, but the power line was live and the power company couldn't cut off power, so the first responders were forbidden from attempting to help. My dad was having none of this and drove home to get his backhoe to remove the pole himself. But both girls died before he could successfully free them, more or less in front of his eyes while he tried to reassure them. Number 11. We were out eating lunch together and he got a call to respond to a vehicle/train accident. We got there, me still with my small soda in hand, and the cop on scene looks at me, then my dad, and he says he might want someone to come pick me up because it was going to take a while. The driver of the truck that got hit by the train had coughed his lungs out of his mouth and was going to need a few bags. That image struck with me for a good while. Number 12. The straw that broke the camel's back and why he finally called it quits on being a paramedic was an 8-year-old boy that had drowned in the family's pond. Dad was the first one there, pulled the boy out, and immediately started resuscitation efforts. He stayed unresponsive during the ambulance ride, passing away while my dad kept working on him and kept trying to revive him until the ER room basically pulled him off. When I got older, he admitted that he kind of lost it on that call, because all he could see lying on that gurney was me. Number 13. I have a 2-year-old son, and I'm the Navy's version of military police. My former partner got sent to do patrols, and I got sent to a different division. I get a text saying, "Get home ASAP," so as soon as I can, I head over to his house. He's not okay, so I sent him down and let him talk. He had to take photographs of a little girl who got mauled by a dog the day before. It had bitten her from her diaper area to her armpit. just grabbed and shook her like a rag doll, dropped her, bit down again, and shook, over and over again. These little girls were just playing outside, and this aggressive dog that had attacked someone before, but due to the owners hiding the dog or doing some sort of Jedi mind tricking, had never talked to animal control. This time he had raised hell and waited 6 hours for animal control to show up and take the dog. His new partner whined the whole time, made jokes about the little girl, and was just rude to the victim's family. He said the whole time he was taking pictures he kept seeing my son and his precious little body. He said that he kept imagining his birthmark and everything. That he saw my face and her mom's and just had to try to stay professional to the folks who kept this dog around to attack yet another person. This dude is my rock. I'm just some idiot who fell off the turnip truck spending my entire career as an electrician. He'd done this crap for 12 years in various different areas. He's pretty much been there, done that, yet he just became unglued. I've never seen him cry like that. He looked like he'd aged 10 years or something. I calmed him down, wiped his tears, and sent him off to pick up his 11-year-old child. He begged me to bring my kid over for a family home evening that night. He wanted to make sure my toddler was okay. People tend to see their kids in the victim sometimes. I can't even watch TV shows or movies that have an 11-year-old boy hurt or dying. To me, I always see his son. Number 14. Cop here. This summer I was first on the scene for a missing toddler. I located her and she had wandered off from her family. All day she had wanted to swim in the lake, but her parents said no. I found her about 15 feet out, face down. I don't know how I walked through the water as seamlessly as I did that day, but I cleared those 15 feet out and back faster than if I was on land. I immediately began compressions on the beach. She had black curly hair and just the cutest little face. I can remember pushing her grieving mother off as she tried to get between me and her daughter. After what felt like hours, EMS arrived. I had gotten her a heartbeat, but it was pretty weak. They were talking to our local hospital and I was leading them there, clearing traffic. In the 2 moments I spoke with the driver, he assured me that he didn't care what shit he got in. He was breaking their limits just to keep up with me. We get to the hospital and the doctors are working away. They get a better heartbeat, but we need to get her to a city children's hospital immediately. Of course, it's a Saturday night, and to get to the hospital we have to go through a bar district. We're racing into the city, about to dial it way back, when 8 city cruisers rip out in front of us and clear the street of all the early drunkards. It was a great show of teamwork. We get to the hospital. She still has a faint pulse. The nurses keep working their butts off and saying she's not dead until she's dead and cold, so they start heating her up. Blankets and some sort of inflatable blanket thing I've never seen. I was so sure they'd bring her back around. When they pronounced her dead at about 3 a.m., I lost my mind. I was just so sure that we'd saved her. She didn't do anything wrong. Her parents didn't do anything wrong. She was just this harmless little kid who wanted to go swim on a summer day. I held it together on the outside as best as I could. I left the hospital telling myself when I got to my vehicle I'm going to cry. Nope, I just felt numb. Maybe I just needed that little walk out to process everything. I don't know. So I drive back to my county and I'm stopped by a city copper. I say, "Nah man, she didn't make it. It happens." I finish my shift, go home, and put it out of my mind. Flash forward a couple of months. I stop by an old buddy's house. His daughter runs out from the backyard to give me a hug. She had been swimming in the pool. She was a couple of years older than the girl that had drowned, but looked just like her. I had an attack of some kind. I started crying and I slunk down. Little Alexis was a trooper about it and gave me more hugs. My wife, who was there and witnessed all of this, promptly asked me what the hell was wrong. I finally told her the story. She asked me if maybe that's why I hadn't been getting much sleep anymore. We got me in to see a psychiatrist who specializes in first responders. I've been doing better. I encourage all first responders to please talk about your day. Even if you don't think anything is affecting you, it might, and your loved ones will notice. I encourage anyone thinking of going into emergency services to do it. Despite all of the bad days, I feel so fulfilled and cannot see myself doing anything else. Things are changing. The support is there, the help is there, and it's not seen as weakness to go for help. If anyone else is feeling any pressure or anxiety, or just plain not right, please seek help. Number 15. I'm not a paramedic, but I had just arrived home from a day at work, and I lived about a block from a pretty busy interstate. It was a summer afternoon, so I had the windows open, and as I was watching TV, I heard an explosion. Being from a slightly bigger town with several factories, I had heard explosions similar to this before at the factories. I kind of wrote it off, but after a minute or two, I heard screaming. I ran outside and could see smoke coming from the interstate and could still hear screaming. I sprinted to get to the interstate and could see a car with a boy hanging out of a window, a semi on the other side of the interstate, and a truck in the median. A lady is standing next to me and says she's a nurse, so I help her over the fence. About the same time as this, a guy exits the vehicle in the median and strips off his shirt. This lady approaches him from the line of stopped vehicles and starts screaming to him about how he just killed 2 people. He walks back towards his truck, gets something from it, and starts walking towards her again. About this time, an officer is on the scene and you can very clearly see something in this guy's hand. The officer has his gun drawn but isn't pointing it. The guy is walking around feverishly and suddenly stops and slits his own throat. Blood is pouring down his chest and stomach. He sits down on the road and bleeds out for another minute or so before going into convulsions. They load him up in a helicopter and take off. I walk back home just in a haze. I try to explain to my then wife what the heck I just saw. I couldn't hardly sleep that night. I can't remember if the next day or if it was 2 days, but I see the aftermath on TV. Apparently the guy who slit his own throat had died, so the police and I think it was his brother went to notify his parents in a town close by. They couldn't get anyone to answer the doors, so they barged in to find the parents had been murdered by the guy who slit his throat. I believe that he beat them to death with a baseball bat. He then left the house driving on the interstate, got into some confrontation with the kids in another car, and ran them into the median twice. The second time they were hit, they lost control into the path of an oncoming semi. To this day, it still gives me chills anytime I think about it. Number 16. I went on a police ride-along once, and we responded to a collision on the highway at about 2 a.m. For the previous 2 hours, I had stayed either inside or just near the car for serious calls. This time though, I recognized my friend's boyfriend, who was a paramedic, already on scene. So I approached. I didn't want to distract him or anyone else who was working, so I just stood and watched him work on one of the victims. I don't know whether the man was driver, passenger, or passerby, but his eyes were wide open and darting around, and he was red with blood from neck to knees. My friend's boyfriend calmly picked up what looked like a pile of wet laundry. It was the man's intestines. He placed it in his lap and softly said to him, "I'm sorry. You're not going to live." All of the breath left my body when I heard him say that. Somehow it was clear that he meant it as something tender and human to human in the last moments of this man's life. But it still gives me the chills, and that's all I think about when we're talking. Number 17. Like many others, I'm not an EMT, but I have first responder training in a forestry industry setting. In a job I was supervising, I get a short radio call for distress by a lumberjack, so I head out to the scene and arrive before anyone else. The dude was unconscious, forehead on the steering wheel and with entrails all in his arms and some on his feet. Not able to move the guy by myself, I reclined the seat to tilt him back and did a quick inspection. Thankfully, his chainsaw only cut the skin and muscle of his stomach, and no entrails were damaged. Then, with latex gloves from the FA kits, I carefully put all of his insides back inside and used a water bottle to clean the dirt on his guts that were on the floor. Then I used a clean gauze, a clean plastic shopping bag, and duct tape to keep his insides inside as the heli evac came to get him out. After he got evac, I checked his GPS. This tough SOB walked almost 1.5 kilometers with his entrails in his arms back to his truck to radio for help. If that's not an awesome story about survival, I don't know what is. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you have your own personal scary story that you'd like to send me, send it over at southerncannibal@gmail.com. And before we bring this video to a close, I'd like to shout out all of my $5 or more patrons, as well as my $3 or more patrons featured on screen. So big shout out to Babe Lincoln, Beth A, Kate E, Celeste S, Ellie S, Heather B, Howard R, Jacqueline W, Jazzy G, Jess, Jonathan C, Jonas B, Carrie F, Lori J, Lindsay S, Matthew B, Random Randy, Steph L, Tammy S, and Terry H. Thank all of you so much for supporting me on Patreon. And if any of you would like to join these awesome people and also become a patron, head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/southerncannibal. Thanks, everyone. I hope you all have a good night, and remember to always stay